Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sam. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the Director of Member Experience at Advent Co-working. Advent is a creative co-working community, a podcast studio, which is very important to today's member talk, event space, a yoga studio, an art gallery, so many other things. But most importantly, we are a community, and our weekly event, Advent Member Talks, gives our members an opportunity to share their skills and knowledge, not only with fellow Advent members, but also with the greater Charlotte entrepreneurial community. If this is your first time joining us today, or maybe you've missed some talks, you can watch all of our previous member talks on our YouTube channel, Advent Co-working Videos. So really excited to have you here today. And I'm excited that we have Landis with the Charlotte Readers Podcast joining us today. And he is going to be talking about lessons learned from recording and producing 200 podcast episodes, which is amazing. So if you have any questions for Landis, please go ahead, type those into the comments, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So Landis, I'll hand it over to you.
Sam, so grateful to be here. Missing, because of the pandemic, being in the space, being at Advent Co-working. But I will say to all of y'all that are watching out there, it is the fountain of youth. They do accept, older people like me, and turns us into younger feeling folks every day that we walk in the front door. So it's good. I like being there, and really look forward to getting back into the space. And frankly, as we talk today about my 200 episodes, I got my start at Advent. Advent has a great podcast studio. That's where I started podcasting. And my story a little bit, for those who don't know it, I'm a recovering trial lawyer. I like to think I'm recovering. I'm trying to recover. I did 35 years of trial work, and then exited stage left or right, whichever you prefer, into a podcast studio because I knew nothing about it. And I figured that was a good place to start. My wife said I didn't know anything. Well, I didn't know anything about a mixing board. She said I didn't know anything about a mixing bowl. I really didn't know anything about either one. But going to Advent, they taught me how to use the mixing board. Never taught me how to use a mixing bowl, Sam. You need to do that. That's part of your thing there. But anyway, I got this passion because I'm an author. So I started thinking I wanted to write more while I was a lawyer, thinking about my next path. I wrote 3 books, and I thought, I'm not going to sit around and write. I need to do something. So I said, I know what, I'll do something I know nothing about. I'll go start a podcast. And that's what put me in touch with Advent and their studio, and started working there, met some great people. And we talked podcasting, and I started off there. And things were going spectacularly for about, a year and 3 or 4 months. And then this thing came along called the pandemic, and it shut down my access to the studio because I had to be kind of careful, and I had to figure out another route, which was podcasting over the internet. So that's I learned new things. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about my 5 P's of podcasting, my 5 C's of writing, my 5 L's of interviewing, and my 5 A's of building this passion project. And I'm going to do each one in about 3 or 4 minutes and save some question time for end. So before I do that, though, let me just say my 200th episode, April 13th. You might win a prize if you go sign up for our email list. Just go to charlottereaderspodcast.com, sign up for the book report, which comes out every 2 weeks. We don't have time to spam you. We just send you something every 2 weeks about what's going on with the podcast. But you might win a Kindle, some beats. You might win the Charlotte Readers Podcast beer mug or beer flask or wine cooler. So go sign up for that. Maybe you'll get on there. Check out that that's coming up. Okay, so this is really about what I learned. So let me get to the learning process, because I've learned that life is all about learning. I'm a lifelong learner. I like to think that I can turn my mistakes into something worthwhile, and that's what I've been trying to do along this path. So 5 P's for podcasting. If you're interested in podcasting, this is what I've got. It's not probably all the things you need to think about, but I broke it down this way. And I'll come back to each one, but there's production, performance, persistence, patience, and people. And here's how I break that down. Of course, you got to make the sausage, right? That's the production part of it. I started making the sausage at Advent Co-working in their studio. Great setup. They got a place for 4 people to sit and record. To do this production, you got to record it. You got to figure out how to edit it. You got to figure out how to publish it. When I started out, I couldn't figure out how to find the audio file. I thought I lost the audio file on the very first recording I did. And then once I figured out how to find the audio file, I had to edit it. And it was taking me like 4 or 5 hours to edit 30 minutes. I just recorded an episode over the internet right before this. And I was actually working on show notes and editing it and got it all done and everything done in about, an hour to an hour, 15 minutes. That's a pretty good jump from 4 hours to do just the audio before I started working on this. The point is, if a trial lawyer can figure out how to do this, anybody can figure out how to do this. So anyway, so that's production. Performance, I would say this. What I've learned about podcasting is that really it's about entertainment. So I interview authors. It's what I do. The show has morphed from an hour long to about 30 to 40 minutes long. I do one reading in the middle now instead of a bunch of readings. People want to be entertained. They want it to move quickly. They want to hear some good stuff. So that's about the performance part. Persistence, that's the third one. Anybody who's a podcast coach will tell you that consistency is important. That is, how often is it going to come out? Every week, every 2 weeks, every month? Whatever it is, when you pick it, stick to it. That takes persistence. I made the mistake of adding I don't know if it's a mistake, but I added an extra show for the week. And I thought, I know I can get way ahead and then the pandemic came along. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. Anyway, I put 2 shows out a week. So I have to stay ahead of the game. I record episodes about 2 to 3 months in advance. And I come up with a system, but that's it. You got to just be persistent. But this is the one I'd really, number 4, patience. Used to be this thing the guys would say in high school, patience, jackass, patience. Okay. It's like slow down, recognize that things aren't always going to go right. There was that time I was in the studio at Advent. I was breathing into the microphone so much it sounded like I was a dirty old man. I was trying to figure out, how do I stop that? I know I'll hit pause. I hit pause. Well, what did I do next? I didn't hit record. So I got a lot of great stuff in the way of answers from my guests, but nothing in the way of questions from me on my microphone for the next 10 minutes. Lesson learned, right? Hard way. Be patient. You'll learn the lessons. Hit the record button. That's my lesson. Pandemics, another thing, patience. It took some learning curve to figure out how to record over the internet. And I can see that, Sam, this whole thing y'all are doing, I mean, when you first started out, it was totally different. I mean, you really are, you're now YouTubing, you're got this thing you do. I mean, and you've added this to what you were doing before, and it'll be a thing probably you somehow figure out how to continue to do, even though you weren't doing it before, which is one door opens, one door shuts kind of thing. So that's patience. And the last thing I'd say about podcasting is the people. It's really all about the people. And what I'd say there, for me, being an interview-based show, it's about the guests that come on that I interview and have a good experience with. I learn from them. I have a good experience with them. It's been a little harder over the internet. I can't sit down and do what we do at Advent kind of thing. But secondly is the audience, or maybe firstly is the audience. It's all about the people. And then I'd say the team as well. Put together a great team for the podcast, social media team, social group marketing, publicist, Hannah LaRue, production assistant, Shauna Morgan, website master, Tom Pataccio. All those people helped me get this thing done. And I'm still doing editing and all this other stuff. So anyway, that's my 5 Ps: production, performance, persistence, patience, and people. That's kind of what I've learned. Okay. Now, and let me just leave this one bit of advice here. Don't let people tell you that all it takes to do a podcast is a microphone and the ability to talk. It certainly takes those 2 things, but it also takes, what I've learned is these other 5 things. One of most important of which is, persistence and patience. The other stuff you can learn. If I can learn that other stuff, anybody can learn this other stuff. But that's, I'm really proud of reaching, 200 episodes in 2.5 years. That's kind of a fun thing to do. But, what else are you going to do in a pandemic, right? Talk on a microphone. That's what I did. All right. Because I'm a writing podcast, I'm going to try to move through these quickly, but and then I'll save some time for questions. But since I'm a writer, I've written 3 books. I'm working on my 4th now. Here are the 5 C's of writing. It's not something I created, but I like to think that I've learned it as I've gone through this process, because what I do when I talk to these authors is sort of my cheap form of an MFA. I could have spent $60,000 and gotten an advanced degree in writing, but instead I went and asked 200 authors how to do it. And that's sort of how I'm, becoming a better writer. Well, number one is character. That's the first C I'll put out there for writing. A lot of people think writing is about plot, coming up with a great story, a great twist, a great turn. But a plot, and this is what I've learned from other authors and what I'm working toward, is a plot is nothing without a character that's interesting, that's behaving in it. And basically, you come up with a character that people like, that you enjoy spending time with, and you put all kind of obstacles in their way, right? And that's the plot, and then you also find out that the character reveals more about their character by how they deal with that plot. And the plot, it doesn't have to be a twisty, turny, sci-fi-ish thingish. It can be anything. It could be something as small as a relationship issue, but the character is really interesting, and how they deal with it makes the story more interesting. So character. Always have conflict. That's the other C. Conflict in what you're writing is important, because you can't have a good story without something creating tension. It can be internal conflict, something going inside the character's head. It can be external conflict, something that's acting on the character, that thing that's chasing them, right, in the dark of night, or that problem they're going to have to go face in the morning. That's the external conflict. Now, different than conflict, another C is complication. You've got to throw complications in the way of your characters. That is, these obstacles in the way that they've got to get around, because there's an arc to a good story. A character has to change. You have to start somewhere. Most of the characters start on their back, flat on their back, and they have to get better, whether that's flat on their back emotionally or flat on their back physically, but they have to get better. And you want to make the reader stay with it. So what? Make it harder on them all the way, right? You want to make it as hard as you can on your main character to keep people interested in how the hell they're going to figure out how to get out of it. So complications. Fourth is climax. This is what the story is always building toward. It's the crescendo. And this is where the pace of the book needs to pick up, from what I'm learning. And also, I'm in a revision stage for my fourth book, and I'm learning this. I've had to go back because it's a historical kind of mystery, and I started putting too much history in the back of the book. I've tried to figure out how to move that throughout the book, so that as we build toward the climax, the pace is moving quickly. And then finally, the denouement, but I'm not calling it that. I'm calling it the conclusion. It's the falling action in the story. It's wrapping it up. It's happy. It's sad. It's reflective. It makes you think. It makes you want to click, yes, I want to read book 2 in the series. It's that part of the story that brings it together. So what I've learned in writing from podcasting with authors: character, conflict, complication, climax, conclusion. My advice to you is everyone has a story in them. It's not necessarily the best writers that get published. It's the ones that work the hardest. And that's, I've talked to a lot of writers, and I talked to one, Steve Berry, has 250 million books published worldwide. He told me he was an overnight success, but it took 12 years to get there. So just keep that in mind. It might take 12 years to become an overnight success. I'm pretty much early in that process at the moment. Okay. 5 L's of interviewing right quick, because I do an interview-based podcast. And you might be thinking, if I do a podcast, am I going to talk to myself? Am I going to talk to other people? Well, talking to other people is great. It comes with some logistical issues, because you got to set it up. You got to schedule them. I think I spend as much time scheduling and working with, getting things set up as I do. So that's one thing that you have to think about when you're adding the interview. But what the interview brings is that additional dynamic, that other voice, that other person. And one thing I've learned about interviewing that I didn't do as a trial lawyer, because a trial lawyer, lawyers think they know, everything, want to be in charge of the courtroom and kind of make it all about them sometimes. But really, it's about the witness in court, and it's about the guest on an interview-based podcast. So if you're a host, and one thing I've learned is, and you're taking up all the oxygen on the microphone with your voice, you're not doing a service for your listeners or for your guests. This is just my own little preachy moment here, but your job, my job in that role is to get the guests talking, to get them telling, the listeners what's in their innermost thoughts, and get them to open up to you. So how do you do that? Here are my 5 L's of interviewing. Loose, all right? Or you could add laid back. I don't know, whichever one you like. I found this works for me. I have a laid back style when I interview people. I'm a former trial lawyer, but I left all my cross-examination skills at the door, the podcast door, and I use direct examination. Who, what, when, where, and why. Ask those questions and let the guest bring forth. I've also found that being loose or laid back makes the guest comfortable. And someone who's more comfortable is more likely to open up with you when they're talking. Second, and probably the most important L of interviewing is listen. You cannot do an effective interview without listening to the answers of the person you're interviewing. If you come in with an outline, which I do, I kind of create a little outline of some points I want to talk about, but I always end up jumping around in it. And I always end up asking a question off of the answer that I've just heard. And if you think about it, the people who are listening to you interview this person, if they hear that person say something, but they haven't fully fleshed it out, they're going to say, come on, you idiot interviewer, ask that person the next question. Why? Or how did you feel about that? Or what did you think they were talking about when they said that to you? Or, something of that nature. So listen carefully to the answers you get. It'll help you come up with questions that'll make the interview more interesting. Third in the interviewing process is learn. Learn by preparing for the interview. You learn about your guest. That helps you conduct the interview better. And you learn by conducting the interview. I learn a lot. I mentioned this earlier. My education has been expounding exponentially from these authors. But I always add a component to the podcast. We talk about the book. They read from the book, but I always ask a few writing life questions at the end. And one I keep asking lately is, if you could tell yourself something valuable, tell your younger writing self something valuable that would have helped that younger writing self based on everything you've learned, what would it be? And I'm always amazed at all the answers I get. But there's kind of a theme that runs through it. And that is, you wouldn't be surprised, but just be patient. Don't think you got to do everything at one time. It'll come. All right. Another L, laugh. I like humor. It's kind of like that coffee break in the action. It's that moment when you can kind of settle. It relaxes the guest. It relaxes me. In the John Hart episode that's coming up, I hope you'll listen on April 13th. He's my 200th episode. He's a 6-time New York Times bestselling author, 6 books, 6 New York Times bestselling lists, and he's won the Edgar Award back to back. And I joked with him when he got on the show. This is just what I do, kind of stuff. And I said, John, he mentioned something about all these different places he was being interviewed. And I said, yeah, and I'm really glad that you finally made it to Charlotte Readers Podcast to be able to appear on the podcast. And he played right along. He's like, yeah, my publicist and I, we've been trying for years, to get on Charlotte Readers Podcast. We just couldn't get on. So, well, John, it took winning that second Edgar back to back for me to even consider having you on the podcast. So he was a good sport about it. That book is set in Charlotte. He's a Davidson graduate like I am. He hangs out with John Grisham now in Charlottesville, but he grew up in Salisbury. Very humble guy, and he talks a lot about writing on the show too, and on my Patreon page, which is an offshoot of the regular podcast. Which for about $5 a month, you can listen to me go a deeper dive, which I did with John Hart that time. But again, laugh, humor. The last L I would put in here is love. Love what you're doing. If you do, the guest will know it. The audience will know it. You're more likely to connect with both, and you'll have a much better time. Because, there's some work here. I go back to that point I made earlier. It's not just a microphone. It's not just the ability to talk. There's a lot of work that goes into it. So you might as well love it and enjoy it. My reflection on that is what I'm usually proud of the most when I finish an interview session is when they say, you really asked great questions, and I really enjoyed this experience. And if you can get to that point with your guest, like I've done with some of these guests that I've had, it's a good feeling, and it helps. So, all right, hope I'm staying on time. And quickly, 5 A's of building a successful passion project: aspire, attack, adjust, arc, and all. And I'll tell you what they are real quick. Aspire. Why not do it? That's my thought. Why not do it? What is the worst thing that can happen? I mean, look, I didn't know what a podcast was. Well, I knew what it was. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to get out there in podcast land. but aspire to do it. Just do it. I mean, what's the worst going to happen? I did fail several times. I'm still failing as I go, but failure, I think, is the key to success. If you don't fail, you're not going to get better. Attack, get passionate about it. Get passionate about your passion. Learn by studying and consulting. I mean, one of the things about Advent is I would walk around and ask questions of people, right? And I'd learn from them. And then when I learned one or two things, people would ask me a few questions. I was glad to share what I learned, and learn by doing. Learn some things by doing. 3 is adjust. There will be challenges along the way, but adjustment is critical to success too. I've had to adjust the format. I've had to adjust how I record. I've had to adjust how I schedule. I've had to adjust how I take submissions on the website because it was becoming really difficult to chase people down in 1,000 emails. So adjust. The arc. Every good novel has an arc. I mentioned this earlier. Every good passion project has an arc too. You kind of start down here. I don't know if you can see where my down here is, but it's down here. And hopefully you're going to get, here, but along the way, you're going to have those obstacles in the way, right? They're going to push you back, and just keep moving. And then finally, I say all, AWE, that's a Southern word, I guess, all. Remember why you started, enjoy the ride, enjoy it, have a good experience with it. So my reflection on this is I've loved interviewing authors. I've enjoyed reading their books. I've enjoyed learning from them. I've developed relationships with these authors locally and regionally. I'm starting to get submissions now all over the country. I've interviewed now Australia, South Africa, all over the place. And so it's really fun. So I've got now a mix of Charlotte area regional authors and authors from some New York publishers. Craig Johnson, the Longmire series was our 100th episode. John Hart, our 200th. Next week, actually 2 days from now, interviewed David Baldacci, which is pretty cool. I read a lot of his books. Just finished Jill McCorkle today. She's a well-known North Carolina writer. So that's it. That's kind of my, just that's and the others, the 5s of 4 things.
Awesome, Landis. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I'm really impressed that you've got, 5 to 20 different letters in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I won't remember them tomorrow, but I definitely prepared them just actually, a lot of different letters, but I think it boils down to the sort of the same thing, and that is pick something you enjoy doing and get after it and stay with it, and don't worry if it doesn't always work out.
Yeah, I love it. And so for folks watching, if you have any questions for Landis, go ahead, type those in the comments. I have a few already. But first off, Landis, I'm curious, you went from being a trial lawyer to a podcaster. How did you think of podcasting? What got you interested in it?
Yeah, so the thing that got me interested in it was this idea that you could have sort of an intimate one-on-one conversation with another person about something that they're passionate about and you're passionate about, and that maybe somebody might listen to it, and then it would lead to someone else to have that kind of conversation. I was actually on my back or on my chest getting my back worked on by I had a bad back, and I had a therapist who was working on it, and she had been in radio in Austin, Texas. And I said, tell me about podcasting. And she started talking about it, and she said, well, you can do that. And I said, well, no, I can't. Well, yes, you can. Just, I'll go with you. And so she went to Advent with me, Sarah Vavra, she was helpful. She ran the board the first episode I did. That was very stressful. I was thinking about every question. I was really focused. I was worried about the time. I was worried about, but in retrospect, I think it just was a way to answer your question that, unlike most other mediums, TV or radio, I mean, this is nobody else is in the room, right? And when you listen into a podcast, that's kind of the feel you want. You want to feel like you're sort of a fly on the wall, that Landis is having a conversation with this author, and they're just talking about their book, and they're talking about writing. This is kind of cool to sit in and listen. I wonder what they're going to say next. The same thing I do when I'm listening to some other podcast where somebody's doing an interview, and those moments when they tell you those things that they wouldn't have said to a group of 30 people, that's the best part,
Yeah, for sure. How do you choose who you're going to be interviewing? Like, which author to bring on, or maybe another question, how do authors get onto your show? Maybe we have some folks watching.
Yeah, that's great. So if we've got any authors out there, we now have a submission page at charlottereaderspodcast.com, and you go on and you can upload everything about yourself, your book, your social media, a synopsis, your photo, your book cover, and then we look at that, and we like to have authors who are trying to build their own platforms and have a following on social media so they can help promote themselves. But we take everything from debut authors to we take self-published authors all the way up to New York Times bestselling authors, and it's getting harder, Sam, to do it because I'm getting a lot of submissions now. So I'm having to, I just don't like to say no, but I'm having to say no sometimes now. But that doesn't always mean no forever. It just means I might have to postpone it, for a little while because I've got others in the works. I've already set up recordings from now through the end of May with 2 every week between now and then to record. And so, but if you're an author, go to the website, check it out. And if you want to submit, you can submit there.
Yeah, and I just dropped that link too into the comments for folks to click on.
Good.
So we've spoken a little bit about the authors that you bring on, but to kind of move it to your listeners and for folks who are creating a podcast, an important part is building up an audience.
Sure.
So as you start to build that audience, you learn more about them. How do you balance catering to maybe your audience's like listening habits, or kind of what they want to see versus, staying true to your vision of what you want the podcast to be?
That's a great question. The one frustrating thing about Apple Podcasts is it doesn't let you know exactly who your listeners are. You can, so I have, everybody has a different platform that hosts their audio. The one I use is Blueberry. They provide statistics, as do most host companies, and you can go on and you can see where they're listening and the kind of devices they're listening on, but you don't necessarily always know the demographic that's going on. And the one thing I would say about the podcast, while I try to have a broad sphere, like I've had true crime, mystery, memoir, children's books, just all kinds of different books on the podcast. Some might appeal to people, might not appeal to others. And so I'm probably not getting a listener to listen to every single show because maybe that particular book is not something they would like to read. But hopefully by providing that variety, I'll be able to reach out to, a wider spectrum of people. And I tell you, it is really all about, don't get so consumed about downloads, folks, if you want to get into podcasting. The first season, I released 11 episodes over about 3 months, and the total downloads for those was about 900 and something for the whole 3 months. 2 weeks ago, I had 1,200 downloads in 1 week. So, it increases over time. Just gotta roll with it. Don't pay attention to the downloads. Keep building. Keep working on it. It's not about the download necessarily. It's about a good experience for the guest and those who are listening. I'd love to have 500 dedicated listeners who really love the podcast than worry about having, 100,000 that maybe drop in every 5 months,
Absolutely. That makes sense. So we're hitting time here. So I do want to ask, you to let folks know how they can reach out to you, but I've got one more question that's kind of fun. So we're going to stick that in a little bit.
All right.
But if you, maybe this hasn't happened to you, but if you have ever had an interview that's not going well, like perhaps you asked an unexpected question and the guest didn't react well, do you have any good strategies for turning that around?
Yeah, I had a guest, I won't use any names, of course, but I'd asked them a question and they said yes. And then I asked them another question and they said no. And then I asked them another question and they got nervous. And I was in the studio at Advent. And so I basically just hit the pause button and I said, hey, you need a drink of water? You need anything? Let's talk about the equipment here. And I said, I started doing this. I was really nervous about this thing. but it will help me if you maybe give a little bit more context to your answer. On radio, you can't do that very well because it's live, right? I had the luxury of being able to do it in the studio, and they did relax and loosen up, but they were really nervous, and I had to kind of, maybe I hadn't, that kind of gave me the lesson. Maybe I should prep my witnesses more for, I've got a laid back style. I've got editing software. This is
Mm,
not live. Nobody's watching us. You know, if you make a mistake, I can fix it. I started doing that more after that situation, but it's really, it's difficult when you ask a question and you think they're going to give you at least 30 seconds and they give you yes or no. And I said, I don't think I have enough questions on my list to make this last 30 minutes.
right. Cool. Thank you. That's our 10-minute episode.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Awesome, Landis. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing this knowledge with us all. If folks want to get in touch with you or learn more about what you do, what's the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, so they can go to the podcast website, charlottereaderspodcast.com. We're on Facebook at Charlotte Readers Podcast. I think Instagram as well. And I'm on Twitter at Charlotte Reader. You can reach out to me at Landis at charlottereaderspodcast.com. And when the pandemic goes away, I'll be back over there at Advent hanging out and bothering Sam and all those good folks at Advent and asking all those questions. But yeah, check us out and go sign up for our book report at the website. You might win something if you look at your name on April 13th on the list there. So this has been
Exciting.
Sam. Thank you for having me to talk about this passion.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Landis. And I hope everyone that you'll join us next week. Our Advent Member Talks. It's every Tuesday at 4:30 here on Facebook Live. We're going to be joined by Quentin Williams next week, and he's going to be talking about how we can build community through play. And this is specifically about branding for your company. So really important a topic there. So thank you again, Landis. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day.